Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. Last session, a Democrat state representative said he did not want men to beat up on women, but he was fine if a trans athlete beat the crap out of a female boxer. And then it actually happened at the Olympics. These are the Democrats we're dealing with in Texas. There's a couple other things we're going to cover today. Let's get to the show. Angela Carini is the female boxer who jumped into the ring with Imani Khalif. And what we now know about Imani is that he is an individual who was born with male chromosomes, but not male genitalia, right? And so this is what would best be described as an abnormal male who is been allowed to compete in Olympic boxing. And the final competition in the Olympic female boxing was actually two males, one biological male who's transitioning, and the other who was what I would describe as an abnormal male born with health problems, who then decided to identify as a woman and then compete in women's sports. The ironic thing is that just last session, during a debate on the Texas House floor, so I don't really talk about international politics or culture, but if it relates to something that's going on in Texas and something that continues to go on in Texas, then it is relevant to this show. And last session, when John Busey was actually debating on the House floor against the man's ban in women's sports and the boys' ban in girls' sports, he was asked this question by Representative Nate Schatzline, if he was okay if men went into women's boxing and beat the crud out of them. And this is what he had to say. Let's go to the clip.
I believe that having biological males compete in women's sports provides more or less opportunities for our daughters.
I believe that having trans women not be discriminated against and compete in women's sports provides more opportunity for the children and young adults of the state of Texas.
Here's a better question. Do you believe it's fair for a biological man, because that's who we're talking about, to receive a scholarship that would have otherwise gone to a biological woman?
I believe that trans women should be allowed to compete in the state of Texas at all levels, and that the colleges are handling this issue just fine.
I believe they should be able to compete as well in their biological sexes competition. Do you believe that biological males should be able to enter our daughters' locker rooms?
I believe that trans women should be treated equally and that the state of Texas should not discriminate against any Texan.
So just to clarify, you believe that biological males should be able to enter our daughters' locker rooms?
I believe that trans women should not be discriminated against by this body or by this state.
Just to clarify, what you're saying is you believe that biological men should be able to undress in a locker room in front of our daughters?
I believe that the state of Texas should never condone discrimination, including against trans women in the state of Texas.
And do you believe that to be the case in all sports, that biological men should be able to compete against biological women in all sports?
We should not discriminate against trans women in the state of Texas. We shouldn't do it from this front mic or from the back mic, and we shouldn't do it in the laws we pass. And we're in danger of doing that today.
Just to clarify, let's just indulge me for a moment. You believe that biological men should be able to compete against our young women in basketball?
I'm sorry, what did you say? I didn't hear the question.
You believe that biological men should be able to compete against biological women in basketball?
I believe that trans women should be able to compete in women's sports.
How about wrestling?
I believe that you mean women, men, height? I mean, I run a youth sports league. We have wrestling. Wrestling's based on height. It's based on weight.
Okay.
You've got weight classes. I believe it's 15 levels.
How about in boxing?
You're the wrestling expert, though, from the back.
How about in boxing? You think that a biological man should be able to beat up on a girl inside of a ring?
I'm sorry, you want a man to beat up on a girl?
That's what I'm asking.
No, I don't think a man should beat up on a girl. No, I do not think that.
So you would have believed that
I believe that trans women should be able to compete in any and all sports of women's
So
sports.
you don't acknowledge
but I don't
that-
believe adult men should be beating up on girls.
You
which is
don't
what I think
acknowledge
just
that
asked
your
about.
definition of a trans woman is, in fact, a biological man who's going through transition.
My definition of a trans woman is a trans woman.
The funny thing is that we ask these hypothetical questions of Democrats during the legislative session, and they love to act like conservatives are just being crazy and asking them weird questions, when the reality is that this is the time that we live in. Now, John Busey is allowed to be a rather powerful and influential member of the legislature. He passes quite a few bills every single session. And so I just go back to the importance of the current battle going on in the Texas House of Representatives regarding the leadership controversy that's going on, regarding not only the removal of Dade Phelan as speaker, but actual replacement of him with someone who is reform-minded. And that I do want to remind everybody that conservatives are not opposing Dade Phelan as speaker. Conservatives are opposing the status quo that's leading the Texas House of Representatives, okay? This is not personality driven. This is about policy and structure. If you were to replace Dade Phelan and with somebody who's almost identical to him in the way they are going to govern the Texas House, nothing has really changed. If you replace Dennis Bonnen with Dade Phelan, it was virtually the same leadership. Actually, Dennis Bonnen is a much more talented politician than Dade. I think Dennis would have navigated these conflicts in a much, I would just say, more prudent manner. But he still would have governed very much in hand with the Democrats and acquiesced to them and given them shared power that they then leverage to kill a bunch of conservative policy. So the end result would have been very similar. He would have just done it in a smarter way politically. Now, Dade and Dade's lieutenants, if they can't get Dade elected, are going to try to replace him with somebody who's as much like him as possible, right? So conservatives aren't just opposing Dade, they're opposing Dade and somebody like Dade. Now, the lieutenant governor recently sent out an email. So what happened last week is you had the letter that the lieutenant governor and governor sent to the Legislative Budget Board, telling them, outlining some of the priorities for next session from a policy perspective, from a funding perspective. And in that letter, which is typically signed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker, they included school choice as something that we should be preparing financially for. And Dade Phelan, instead of signing on to that letter, took his name off the letter, or refused to put his name on the letter, is what I would say. Refused to put his name on the letter, and then sent his own letter without school choice on his letter, right? So he's just continuing to set up these chambers to have bigger friction than they need. Because we have the votes to pass school choice next session. And yet, even when the lower chamber is ready to accomplish this policy, Dade Phelan is still going to stand in its way. And so Dan Patrick sent an email just this last week, basically saying, hey, I hope people aren't making summer plans. The headline was, Texas House members should not make vacation plans next summer. And the implication from our lieutenant governor was basically like, look, if the Texas House is going to continue doing what it's doing, and they're going to stay on the same path, heck, they might even impeach someone at the end of the next session while killing school choice. So don't plan on summer plans, because we're going to come back if we don't get school choice done. The good news is that Dade Phelan right now has an increasingly narrow path to returning to the speakership, if not no path at all. He really has gotten to the point to where his own Republican chairmen don't even have faith in his ability to get returned. He's not asking people for their vote. He's not telling people his plan to keep the gavel. He's not telling Democrats his plan. The Democrats aren't even really with Dade Phelan right now. They're having conversations with any Republican who will talk to them about what next session could look like. So you see that kind of leadership structure just crumbling, and that is a very positive thing. This week, I was going down the rabbit hole of Lex Friedman's podcast that he did with Elon Musk and a bunch of his leadership team at Neuralink. Now, it is an 8.5-hour podcast. It might be one of the longest podcasts ever done. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole, feel free. That is not what I'm going to cover. I'm not going to cover in detail all the things that they covered today. But what I am going to talk about is something that we need to be talking about in Texas. And so when Lex Friedman was interviewing Elon Musk, who's, now a Texan and the wealthiest Texan there is, and probably the person who has more of an impact on our social, cultural, and political climate than any other individual Texan, asked him about the things that he's working on and the problems he sees with society, right? And at one point they have a conversation about basically factors that go into a nation's decline, a civilizational decline. So I want to go to 2 different clips from that conversation. Let's go to the clip.
What do you think it takes for the American empire to not collapse in the near-term future, in the next 100 years, to continue flourishing?
Well, the single biggest thing that is often actually not mentioned in history books, but Durant does mention it, is the birth rate. So, perhaps to some, a counterintuitive thing happens when civilizations become are winning for too long. The birth rate declines. It can often decline quite rapidly. We're seeing that throughout the world today. Currently, South Korea is I think maybe the lowest fertility rate, but there are many others that are close to it. It's 0.8, I think. If the birth rate doesn't decline further, South Korea will lose roughly 60% of its population. But every year that birth rate is dropping, and this is true through most of the world. I don't mean to single out South Korea. It's been happening throughout the world. So as soon as any given civilization reaches a level of prosperity, the birth rate drops. And now you can go and look at the same thing happening in ancient Rome. So Julius Caesar took note of this, I think around 50-ish BC, and tried to pass, I don't know if he was successful, tried to pass a law to give an incentive for any Roman citizen that would have a third child. And I think Augustus was able to, well, he was, the dictator, so the Senate was just for show. I think he did pass a tax incentive for Roman citizens to have a third child, but those efforts were unsuccessful. So, but I think AI risk mitigation is important. Being a multi-planet species would be a massive risk mitigation. And I do want to sort of, once again, emphasize the importance of having enough children to sustain our numbers and not plummet into population collapse, which is currently happening. Population collapse is a real and current thing. So the only reason it's not being reflected in the total population numbers is that as much is because people are living longer. But you can, it's easy to predict, say, what the population of any given country will be. You just take the birth rate last year, how many babies were born, multiply that by life expectancy, and that's what the population will be steady state, unless if the birth rate continues at that level. But if it keeps declining, it will be even less and eventually dwindle to nothing. So I keep, banging on the baby drum here for a reason. Because it has been the source of civilizational collapse over and over again throughout history.
It's not just New York and California that have this replacement problem. It's not just the liberals on the East and West Coasts who are experimenting with the idea of not actually having children, of not actually growing the population through the means of promoting the family unit and then producing children from those family units that are created. That is how civilizations continue. And Texas is below the replacement birth rate. That is 2. Okay? We are at like 1.6. Is it cool to be a Texan? Absolutely. But you have to understand that we are flirting with these new radical ideas just as much as some of the blue states are. Now, they have lower birth rates in those liberal states because they have more young men and young women who are not planning on having children than at any time in human history. So yes, they might be at 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.4, but we're at 1.6, which is still far from 2. Now, the question is, what could we do? The good news is my 4th child is due in September. The bad news is that's not enough. So there's an individual responsibility aspect we have here, which is that we should, as individuals, actually believe in family formation. There's a societal aspect that we should speak positively about the family, about children, and about how much more meaning and purpose your life will have if you actually have children, grow your family. We should talk about how lonely it is to be in your 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s with no kids. And that is not judgmental. If there are going to be people that are listening or watching this show that are 50 or 60 that don't have kids. People I meet late in life who either had no kids or 1 kid or 2 kids will consistently say how much they regret not having more kids. But we don't talk about it. We find it bad to discuss. Have you ever been around a conversation when somebody says, "Oh, well, we're not sure we're going to have kids right now." And everybody in the group says, "Hey, y'all just do you. Y'all do you." Right? There's this kind of general idea we have that if anybody's not planning on having children, we just kind of tell them all, that's fine. Move about your day. No problem here. So there's an individual responsibility aspect, then there's this kind of societal aspect of how do we talk about it. It also gets into how you talk about your kids. Okay? So if you have kids and people ask you about your kids and the things you tell them are all the negative things about your kids, you are literally speaking into society this idea that children are this drain, that they're this negative aspect on your life, that they take it down. Have you ever been around young couples when all the other married people are going, "Enjoy your life before children come"? Yeah, that's dumb. We're literally telling all these people, hey, enjoy your life while you have a life, implying that literally the producing of children and the bringing children into your life takes away from your life when the opposite is true. My grandparents had 2 kids. And the biggest blessing in their life is that their 2 kids had 4 and 7 children apiece. So now when they are with their friends, so many of their friends had 1 or 2 kids, and then their kids had 1 or 2 or no kids. And all of a sudden they have 1 grandchild. And my grandparents have 15 grandchildren. It is a vastly different life. And they will tell you it is a life that other people their age look at with envy. Nobody says, hey, I'm glad I've had a life my whole life and I didn't have kids. Okay, so individual responsibility, societal responsibility of how we talk about not only families, but also our own children. And then lastly, I'm going to get into at least the start of a conversation around family formation policies. In Hungary, when you have either 3 or 4 children, you don't pay Social Security taxes anymore. You want to know why? Because Social Security is a system that only works if people have children. Did you know that if you grow up your whole life and pay Social Security taxes and then retire and get your Social Security paycheck, you're a consumer of that system, not a provider of that system. If you have 3 or 4 or 5 children, and then by the time you start taking Social Security, all of your children are working and all of your children are paying into Social Security, they're paying more. See, you are a contributing factor to that system, which is actually allowing for this system to still exist for the rest of the seniors of society. So the idea is, hey, if you have your 3rd or 4th or 5th child, you're done paying Social Security taxes because you've actually set up your life in such a way that this is going to continue into the future. Kamala Harris is talking about taking away the child tax credit that Marco Rubio fought so hard for. These are real policy battles that are going to go on. Not only should Republicans fight to keep the child tax credit, we should be looking at modeling Hungary and the way they do it. And then if you look down into how Texas would operate, how would this look like at a state level if we started talking about children and family formation from a policy perspective? I think there are a myriad of things you can consider. So one of them would be, and this is not family formation, but it is a pro-family policy that Texas should get into, is making sure that Texas is the cheapest state in America to adopt a child in. Okay? So any children out there that can be integrated into a family and then can become part of a family and can grow into a Texan that has a mother and a father and siblings, that should be something the government prioritizes. I believe, I had a couple friends of mine do some research. Ohio is the cheapest state in America to adopt a child. I think Michigan is the second. I mean, we're definitely better than Ohio and Michigan. We'll have to see. Nate Schatzline is the person who has done more work on this than anybody else. We talked about him earlier in the show, but he'll come up again because he is working on this policy. So that is something that if any of you care about, if any of you have adopted children and believe that that should be part of any type of family policy considered, reach out to Nate Schatzline's office, talk to him about that.
News and analysis on what's happening in Texas. End your day with daily headlines from Texas Scorecard. Every day at 5 p.m., join me, Brandon Waltons, as we recap the biggest stories of the day and talk about why they matter to you. From the state capitol to town hall, there's no shortage of events happening. Keep up with it all. Watch and subscribe to Daily Headlines from Texas Scorecard.
We should 100% look at treating children like children the second they are conceived. Now, what do I mean by that? So we can have pro-life laws that say, hey, once a child, you need to protect the life of the child. But I actually do believe that if there is any government benefit that an individual is given the day the child is born, then they should receive that benefit the day they are pregnant. Okay? And the reason I say that is because we need to make it very clear to every single Texan, your child is a child. Your child is a good thing. Your child is something we believe in. And your child will be treated as a child the second they are a human being. I do believe that these type of policies will likely lead to increases in the birth rate. I think we should look at property tax reductions for larger families. We have a homestead exemption. So this is your home that you own. Okay, you get a reduction. I talked about that during my property tax. But why couldn't we say, hey, for larger families, we'll give you an even larger property tax deduction? Kids are expensive, especially when you have Bidenomics at the grocery store. You have 3 or 4 or 5 kids. Can you imagine telling a family, hey, when you have your 4th or 5th kid, you don't pay property taxes anymore? I'm telling you, it might change some people's calculation in the conversations they're having. And not only that, it would be the state actively saying, we actually believe this is a problem. It's a it's a problem that rises to the level of civilization extinction, right? So we actually do believe that it needs to be addressed just as much as some random restructuring of a state agency. Anyways, Elon Musk talked about it, so I figured I could too. And I hope that you understand that as we go into the next legislative session, family formation policies and pro-family policies have to be at the forefront of what we are considering. There's a lot of other think tanks and groups out there talking about these policies, so there will be a lot more out there to discuss. I just wanted to get the conversation started here, but I think we need to continue in that conversation, and it must be a priority as we go into the next legislative session. I am recording this on the road. Found a place to record it real quick because I am off for a week. I've pre-recorded a show for next week, which I think will also be helpful. But I'm going to be in Colorado, and I hope that all of you have a blessed week. I will be trying to not follow Texas politics as much as I usually do. I had this long list of things I worked on that I was going to work on during vacation, and I gave my wife the list because she asked me. She got really mad because it's like a bunch of stuff that I should be doing while I'm not on vacation that I've been building up. So now I have a long list of things I'm going to do while we're in the mountains, but she has told me I'm not allowed to do those things. So I truthfully have no idea what I'm doing for the next week. I'm asking permission for each thing I'm doing at any given time. It's going great on the marital side, and it's just going to be a fantastic week. So I hope that each of you have as blessed a week as I'm going to have. May God bless you, and may God bless the great state of Texas.
Do you want to get your news from people who share your values? Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.